A shepherd boy stands on a hillside in Anatolia. The year is 1299. His name is Osman, and he's about to found an empire that will last for over 6 centuries. An empire that will stretch across 3 continents, from the gates of Vienna to the shores of the Arabian Peninsula, from the Crimean steppes to the Ethiopian highlands. This isn't just another story of conquest and kings. This is the story of how a small Turkish tribe transformed into one of history's most powerful civilizations. An empire that would introduce coffee to Europe, perfect the art of gunpowder warfare, and create architectural wonders that still leave visitors breathless today. The Ottomans didn't just conquer lands. They absorbed cultures, traditions, and knowledge from every corner of their vast domain. They turned Istanbul into the world's most cosmopolitan city, where Jewish refugees from Spain traded alongside Greek merchants, where Arab scholars debated Persian poets, and where European ambassadors marveled at technologies they'd never seen before. But here's what makes their story truly remarkable. The Ottoman Empire wasn't built on destruction. It was built on a radical idea for its time, that an empire could be stronger by preserving the diversity of its peoples rather than crushing it. While medieval Europe burned with religious wars, the Ottomans created a system where Christians, Jews, and Muslims could live side by side, each community governing itself under the empire's protective umbrella. Tonight, we'll walk through the grand bazaars of Constantinople, stand in the war councils of sultans who changed the course of history, and witness the slow transformation of an empire that seemed eternal. We'll discover how Turkish nomads became the inheritors of Roman legacy, how they mastered the art of siege warfare before anyone else, and why their decline took 300 years, longer than most empires even exist. This is a story of ambition and tolerance, of conquest and culture, of power gained and eventually lost. It's a story that shaped the modern world in ways we're only beginning to understand. Every empire begins with a dream, sometimes literally. Osman, the founder of the Ottoman dynasty, claimed he had a vision that would shape the destiny of millions. In his dream, a tree grew from his chest, its branches spreading until they covered the known world. 4 rivers flowed from its roots: the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile, and the Danube. The leaves of this tree transformed into swords, all pointing toward Constantinople, the greatest city of the medieval world. Whether this dream was real or a later invention doesn't matter as much as what it represented. The ambition of a minor Turkish chieftain on the fringes of the dying Byzantine Empire. Osman wasn't born into power. His father, Ertuğrul, led a small tribe of perhaps 400 families, Turkish nomads who had fled westward from the Mongol invasions that devastated Central Asia. The Anatolia that Osman inherited in 1281 AD was a fractured land. The once mighty Seljuk Sultanate had shattered into competing principalities called beyliks. To the west, the Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of Rome, still controlled the coast and the great city of Constantinople, but its power had been waning for centuries. The Mongols threatened from the east, while Crusader states dotted the landscape to the south. In this chaos, Osman saw opportunity, but he didn't start with grand military campaigns or declarations of empire. Instead, he began with something far more practical: raids. The early Ottomans were ghazis, holy warriors who raided Christian territories not just for plunder, but for religious merit. Each successful raid brought more warriors to Osman's banner, drawn by the promise of wealth and paradise. What set Osman apart from other tribal leaders was his treatment of conquered peoples. When he captured a Byzantine town, he didn't massacre its inhabitants or force conversions. Christians who submitted kept their churches and their faith. Farmers who stayed on their land paid lower taxes than they had under Byzantine rule. Greek administrators who knew how to run cities were welcomed into Ottoman service. This pragmatic tolerance became the foundation of Ottoman expansion. Word spread among Byzantine frontier towns. Surrender to Osman meant safety and often prosperity. Fight and face the consequences of siege warfare. Many chose surrender. By 1299 AD, Osman felt confident enough to declare independence from the Seljuk Sultanate. This date marks the traditional founding of the Ottoman Empire, though at this point it was still just one of many Turkish principalities competing for dominance. Osman's realm consisted of a few towns and the countryside around them, perhaps covering an area no larger than modern-day Connecticut. But Osman understood something that many conquerors miss. Lasting power comes not from the sword alone, but from effective governance. He established courts where both Islamic law and local Christian customs were respected. He created a system where talented individuals, regardless of their origin, could rise through merit. A Greek Christian who converted to Islam could become a general. A captured slave who showed ability could become a provincial governor. This meritocracy would become one of the Ottoman Empire's greatest strengths, and eventually one of its fatal weaknesses. But in Osman's time, it was revolutionary. While European nobility jealously guarded their privileges based on bloodline, the Ottomans were creating a system where a shepherd's son could rise to command armies. Osman's military innovations were equally important. The traditional Turkish cavalry, light horsemen with composite bows, formed the core of his forces, but he also began incorporating Byzantine military techniques and siege equipment. His forces learned to conduct proper sieges, building catapults and protective shelters, techniques essential for capturing walled cities. More importantly, Osman created the timar system, a way of paying soldiers without depleting the treasury. Instead of wages, cavalrymen received rights to collect taxes from specific lands. In exchange, they had to maintain their horses and equipment and answer the Sultan's call to war. This system created a warrior class with a direct stake in the empire's success. The more land the empire conquered, the more timars available for distribution. The Byzantine Empire watched these developments with growing alarm. In 1302 AD, they sent an army to crush Osman's growing power. The two forces met at Baphius, near modern-day Istanbul. The Byzantine force was larger and better equipped, with heavy cavalry and professional soldiers. But Osman's troops knew the terrain, and their mounted archers devastated the Byzantine ranks before they could close for hand-to-hand combat. The Battle of Baphius was a decisive Ottoman victory. More than just a military triumph, it established the Ottomans as the dominant Turkish power in northwest Anatolia. Warriors from other beyliks began defecting to Osman, drawn by his success and reputation for generous rewards. Byzantine towns that had been wavering now rushed to negotiate surrender terms. But Osman was patient. Unlike many conquerors who overextended themselves in pursuit of glory, he consolidated each gain before moving forward. He spent years besieging the Byzantine city of Bursa, understanding that capturing this wealthy trade center would transform his principality from a frontier state into a genuine power. Osman never lived to see Bursa fall. He died in 1323 AD or 1324 AD. The exact date remains uncertain, but his son Orhan captured the city just months after his father's death. According to legend, Osman's last words were instructions to his son, "My son, I am dying, and I die without regret, because I leave behind such a successor as you." Osman had transformed a tribe of 400 tents into an emerging state that controlled much of northwest Anatolia. But more importantly, he had established the principles that would guide Ottoman expansion for centuries: pragmatic tolerance, merit-based advancement, and patient, methodical conquest. His dream of a tree covering the world seemed less fantastic with each passing year. The question now was whether his successors could build on this foundation, or whether the Ottoman state would fragment like so many Turkish principalities before it. The answer would come from an unexpected source, not from Turkish tradition, but from adapting the very institutions of the empires they were replacing. Orhan inherited more than territory from his father. He inherited a vision. But visions need structures to survive, and the second Ottoman ruler understood this perfectly. While Osman had been a raider and conqueror, Orhan would become a builder of institutions. The capture of Bursa in 1326 AD changed everything. This wasn't just another Byzantine town, it was a major commercial hub on the Silk Road, with established markets, workshops producing fine silk, and connections to trade networks stretching from China to Italy. For the first time, the Ottomans controlled a true city, and with it came new responsibilities and opportunities. Orhan made Bursa his capital and immediately began transforming it. But he didn't destroy Byzantine structures or impose purely Turkish customs. Instead, he built alongside and on top of what existed, creating something entirely new, a synthesis of Turkish, Byzantine, Persian, and Arab influences that would become distinctly Ottoman. The first major mosque in Bursa tells this story perfectly. Built by Orhan, it incorporated Byzantine stonework techniques, Persian architectural designs, and Arab calligraphy. The builders were local Greeks and Armenians working alongside Turkish craftsmen. This wasn't just practical, it was philosophical. The Ottomans saw themselves not as destroyers of civilization, but as its inheritors and improvers. But Orhan's greatest innovation wasn't architectural, it was military. Around 1330 AD, he created a new type of soldier that would become the backbone of Ottoman power for centuries, the Janissaries. The word comes from Yeniçeri, meaning new soldier, and they were unlike any military force the world had seen. The Janissaries were Christian boys taken from conquered territories, converted to Islam, and trained from childhood to be elite soldiers. This sounds cruel by modern standards, and it was. But in the context of the 14th century, it offered something remarkable. These boys, often from poor farming families, were given the finest education available, trained in languages, mathematics, and administration, as well as warfare. They could rise to become generals, governors, even grand viziers, the Sultan's chief minister. The Janissaries were slaves in name, but elites in practice. They received regular salaries, unusual for medieval soldiers, and were forbidden to marry or engage in trade, making them completely dependent on and loyal to the Sultan. They lived in barracks, trained constantly, and developed an esprit de corps that made them formidable in battle. Initially, the Janissary corps was small, perhaps 1,000 men under Orhan, but even this small force gave the Ottomans a crucial advantage. While European armies relied on feudal levies, farmers who fought for a few months then returned home, and Turkish forces depended on tribal cavalry with their own agendas, the Ottomans had professional soldiers who could campaign year-round. Orhan also formalized the administrative structure his father had begun. He appointed the first Grand Vizier, delegating day-to-day governance while retaining ultimate authority. He established separate military and religious hierarchies, ensuring that no single group could challenge the Sultan's power. He created a council called the Divan, where ministers discussed policy and adjudicated disputes. These might seem like bureaucratic details, but they were revolutionary. Most medieval states depended on the personal abilities of their rulers. A strong king meant a strong kingdom. A weak one meant chaos. But Orhan was creating institutions that could function regardless of who sat on the throne. A state that could survive mediocre sultans and thrive under great ones. The religious policy Orhan established would define the Ottoman Empire for its entire existence. Unlike European kingdoms where religious uniformity was enforced through violence, or earlier Islamic empires where non-Muslims were heavily restricted, Orhan formalized a system of remarkable tolerance. Christians and Jews became dhimmis, protected peoples who paid an extra tax called the jizya in exchange for religious freedom and exemption from military service. This wasn't perfect equality. Muslims had clear legal and social advantages, but compared to the religious persecution common in medieval Europe, it was enlightened. Jewish communities fleeing European pogroms found safety in Ottoman lands. Greek Orthodox Christians, viewed with suspicion by Catholic crusaders, often preferred Ottoman rule to Latin domination. Orhan's reign also saw the Ottomans' first expansion into Europe. In 1354 AD, a massive earthquake devastated the Gallipoli Peninsula, destroying Byzantine fortifications. Orhan's son Suleiman Pasha quickly occupied the ruins, establishing the first permanent Ottoman foothold on European soil. This wasn't planned, it was opportunistic, but it would change the course of history. The Byzantine Empire, weakened by civil war, could only watch as Ottoman forces began raiding into Thrace. European chronicles from this period describe the terror these raids inspired, but also something else: surprise at Ottoman discipline. Unlike the chaotic pillaging common in medieval warfare, Ottoman forces operated under strict rules. Soldiers who violated orders faced severe punishment. Towns that surrendered peacefully were protected. Only those that resisted faced harsh treatment. Orhan ruled for 36 years, dying in 1362 AD. During his reign, Ottoman territory had tripled in size. But more importantly, he had transformed a tribal confederation into a functioning state. The Ottomans now had a capital, a professional army, an administrative structure, and a foothold in Europe. His son Murad I would inherit these tools and use them to accelerate Ottoman expansion. But Murad would also face the empire's first existential crisis, a coalition of European powers determined to drive the Turks back into Asia. The clash between Cross and Crescent was about to intensify, and the outcome would determine whether the Ottoman Empire would be a brief historical footnote or a world-changing power. What made the Ottomans different from previous nomadic conquerors was becoming clear. The Mongols had swept across continents, but left little permanent mark beyond destruction. The various Turkish tribes that preceded the Ottomans had established kingdoms that rarely lasted beyond their founders. But the Ottomans were building something designed to last, an empire that absorbed the best from every culture it encountered, creating a synthesis that was stronger than any of its parts. Every empire faces a moment when its survival hangs in the balance. For the Ottomans, that moment came on June 15th, 1389 AD, on a field in Kosovo. What happened there would echo through centuries, shaping not just the Ottoman Empire, but the entire history of the Balkans. Murad I had spent 27 years expanding Ottoman power into Europe. He captured Adrianople in 1365 AD, making it his European capital and renaming it Edirne. From there, Ottoman forces spread across the Balkans like water finding every gap in a dam. Bulgaria became a vassal state. Serbian princes paid tribute. Even the mighty city of Constantinople was now surrounded on both sides by Ottoman territory. But expansion created its own problems. The Ottomans were no longer fighting disorganized Byzantine frontier towns. They faced Serbian knights, Bulgarian cavalry, Hungarian armies, European forces that had been perfecting warfare for centuries. And these Christian powers were beginning to understand that divided, they would fall one by one to Ottoman expansion. Prince Lazar of Serbia understood this better than most. He had watched Ottoman forces defeat his rivals, turning proud Serbian nobles into Ottoman vassals. In 1389 AD, he assembled the largest Christian coalition the Balkans had ever seen. Serbs, Bosnians, Albanians, Bulgarians, even Hungarian crusaders. Together, they would make a stand at Kosovo Polja, the field of blackbirds. Murad marched to meet them with an army that reflected the Ottoman Empire's growing diversity. Turkish cavalry rode alongside Serbian vassals fighting for the Ottomans. Greek engineers operated the siege equipment. The Janissaries, now numbering several thousand, formed the infantry corps. Arab and Kurdish auxiliaries guarded the flanks. This wasn't just a Turkish army, it was an Ottoman one, multi-ethnic and multi-religious, unified by loyalty to the Sultan. The night before the battle, both armies knew they faced a historic moment. Serbian epic poems, still sung today, describe Prince Lazar receiving a vision. He could choose an earthly kingdom and victory, or a heavenly kingdom and martyrdom. He chose heaven, according to the legend, ensuring his eternal glory regardless of the battle's outcome. The battle began at dawn. The Serbian heavy cavalry, among the finest in Europe, smashed into the Ottoman lines. For hours, the outcome remained uncertain. The Janissaries held the center, while Turkish cavalry harassed the Christian flanks. Bodies piled up in the summer heat. Both sides fed reserves into the meat grinder, neither gaining decisive advantage. Then something extraordinary happened. Both commanders died. The exact sequence remains disputed. Serbian sources claim a noble named Miloš Obilić pretended to desert, approached Murad's tent to pledge allegiance, then stabbed the Sultan. Ottoman sources say Murad was killed after the battle while inspecting the battlefield. What's certain is that Murad died at Kosovo, as did Prince Lazar, either in battle or executed immediately after. The Battle of Kosovo ended without a clear victor, but the aftermath favored the Ottomans. Murad's son Bayezid, who commanded a wing of the army, immediately took control. His first act was to order the strangulation of his brother Yaqub, ensuring no succession dispute. This brutal practice of fratricide would become Ottoman tradition, justified as preventing civil wars that could destroy the empire. Bayezid then did something that demonstrated Ottoman pragmatism. Instead of devastating Serbia in revenge for his father's death, he offered generous terms to the Serbian nobles. Lazar's son Stefan became an Ottoman vassal but kept his lands and autonomy. Serbian knights would fight in Ottoman armies, and Stefan's sister would marry Bayezid, sealing the alliance. Serbia wasn't destroyed, it was absorbed. Kosovo became legend on both sides. For Serbs, it represented heroic sacrifice against overwhelming odds, a source of national identity that persists today. For the Ottomans, it marked their transformation from raiders to rulers of European territory. The death of Murad on the battlefield became proof of Ottoman commitment. They weren't just Asian invaders who would eventually retreat. They were here to stay. Bayezid, who would earn the nickname Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, for his rapid military campaigns, inherited an empire at a crossroads. The Ottomans controlled vast territories, but faced threats on multiple fronts. In Anatolia, other Turkish beyliks resented Ottoman dominance. In Europe, Hungary was organizing new crusades, and from the east came whispers of a new threat, a conqueror named Timur, who claimed to be the heir of Genghis Khan. Bayezid chose to strike everywhere at once. Within a year of Kosovo, he had conquered most of Anatolia, absorbing the remaining Turkish beyliks through a combination of force and diplomacy. He then turned back to Europe, laying siege to Constantinople itself. For 7 years, from 1394 AD to 1402 AD, the ancient city was blockaded, surviving only because its massive walls still defied Ottoman siege technology. The speed of Bayezid's campaigns was unprecedented. He would fight in Anatolia in spring, race back to Europe for summer campaigns, then return to Asia for autumn operations. His armies barely had time to rest between battles. This earned him his nickname, but also created problems. Exhausted troops, overextended supply lines, and resentful vassals who felt the Sultan demanded too much. In 1396 AD, Europe launched its response, the Crusade of Nicopolis. This wasn't the ragtag coalition of Kosovo, but a proper crusade blessed by the Pope, led by Hungarian King Sigismund and featuring the flower of French chivalry. French knights, who considered themselves the finest warriors in Christendom, boasted they would drive the Turks not just from Europe, but from Asia as well. The Crusader army was impressive, perhaps 16,000 strong, including heavily armored knights, Hungarian cavalry, and Wallachian auxiliaries. They marched down the Danube, capturing Ottoman fortresses, confident in their superiority. The French knights, in particular, dismissed warnings about Ottoman tactics. They had defeated English longbowmen and German infantry. How difficult could Turkish horsemen be? They found out at Nicopolis. Bayezid had raced from the siege of Constantinople, covering the distance in an impossibly short time. The Crusaders, expecting him to still be in Asia, were caught completely off guard. Worse, they let pride dictate their tactics. The French knights insisted on leading the charge, refusing to wait for Hungarian support or coordinate with other forces. The battle was a massacre. The French knights charged uphill against prepared Ottoman positions. They broke through the first line of Ottoman irregulars, only to find themselves facing the Janissaries' disciplined ranks and a storm of arrows from Turkish cavalry. When they finally retreated, exhausted and decimated, Bayezid's Serbian cavalry, yes, Serbian knights fighting for the Ottomans just 7 years after Kosovo, delivered the killing blow. The aftermath of Nicopolis sent shockwaves through Europe. Bayezid executed most of the prisoners, sparing only those worth substantial ransoms. The flower of French nobility was either dead or bankrupting their families to pay for their freedom. King Sigismund barely escaped, fleeing down the Danube and eventually reaching Constantinople by ship. Europe wouldn't launch another major crusade against the Ottomans for decades. The message was clear. The Ottomans weren't just raiders or temporary conquerors. They were a military superpower capable of defeating the combined forces of Christendom. But at the moment of his greatest triumph, Bayezid made a fatal error. Drunk on success, he sent an insulting message to Timur, the Central Asian conqueror who had built an empire stretching from India to Russia. Bayezid demanded Timur return certain Turkish territories and addressed him as an inferior. It was the kind of mistake that changes history. Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, was not a man to insult. By 1400 AD, he had conquered more territory than any commander since Genghis Khan, leaving pyramids of skulls from Delhi to Damascus. When Bayezid's insulting letter reached him, Timur was 64 years old, partially lame, but still the most feared warrior on earth. The clash between Bayezid and Timur was inevitable. Two expanding empires eventually must collide. But it came at the worst possible moment for the Ottomans. Bayezid's constant campaigns had exhausted his forces. The Turkish beyliks he had forcibly absorbed still resented Ottoman domination. His Serbian and Byzantine vassals were wavering in their loyalty. Timur invaded Anatolia in 1402 AD with an army rumoured to number 140,000. Probably an exaggeration, but certainly larger than anything Bayezid could muster. More dangerous than the numbers was Timur's strategic genius. He sent secret messages to the Turkish lords serving in Bayezid's army, reminding them that he, Timur, was a true Turk, while Bayezid had become Byzantinized, more comfortable in European palaces than Turkic tents. The two armies met near Ankara on July 20th, 1402 AD. Bayezid had chosen the battlefield carefully, positioning his forces on high ground near a water source. But Timur, in a brilliant maneuver, circled around and poisoned or diverted the water supply, forcing Bayezid to fight on ground of Timur's choosing. The Battle of Ankara began at dawn and turned into disaster by noon. The Turkish beyliks that Bayezid had conquered defected mid-battle, their soldiers simply walking over to Timur's lines. The Janissaries fought magnificently, holding their ground even as the army collapsed around them. But courage alone couldn't overcome the odds. By evening, the Ottoman army had ceased to exist. Bayezid himself was captured, the only Ottoman sultan ever taken prisoner. Legend says Timur kept him in a golden cage, displaying the once mighty sultan like a trophy. Whether this is true or not, Bayezid died in captivity within a year, broken by humiliation. The thunderbolt had been extinguished. The Ottoman Empire effectively ceased to exist. Timur restored all the Turkish beyliks Bayezid had conquered, returned Byzantine territories, and left Anatolia fragmented. Worse, Bayezid's sons immediately began fighting for succession. Suleiman controlled European territories. Mehmed held Anatolia around Amasya. Isa claimed Bursa and western Anatolia, while Musa gathered support in the Balkans. For 11 years, from 1402 AD to 1413 AD, the sons of Bayezid fought each other in what Ottomans call the Fetret Devri, the interregnum. It should have been the end. Every neighbour took advantage. Byzantines reclaimed territory, Serbs asserted independence, Hungarians pushed south, and the restored Turkish beyliks expanded their domains. Contemporary observers wrote obituaries for the Ottoman Empire, but empires that survive do so because they build institutions stronger than any individual ruler. The Janissaries, despite everything, remained loyal to the Ottoman ideal, if not to any particular prince. The Taymar system meant provincial cavalry had a vested interest in Ottoman restoration. The administrative structure Orhan and Murad had built continued functioning at the local level. The unlikely victor of this civil war was Mehmed I, who started with the smallest territory but proved the most capable politician. He allied with Byzantine Emperor Manuel II. Yes, the Byzantines backed an Ottoman prince, calculating that a restored but weakened Ottoman Empire was preferable to chaos. One by one, Mehmed defeated his brothers, not through military genius, but through patience and diplomacy. By 1413 AD, Mehmed had reunified most Ottoman territories. But the empire he inherited was a shadow of Bayezid's domain. The treasury was empty, the army reduced, vassals openly rebellious. Many expected Mehmed to immediately launch reconquests, but he did something unexpected. He focused on internal consolidation. For 8 years, Mehmed avoided major wars. He rebuilt the treasury through careful taxation and trade promotion. He reformed the Janissary corps, which had grown corrupt during the civil war. He re-established central authority over provincial governors who had become semi-independent. Most importantly, he restored the Ottoman legal system, ensuring that justice, the foundation of legitimate rule in Islamic thought, functioned properly. Mehmed also showed remarkable religious tolerance. He rebuilt churches destroyed during the Civil War and confirmed the privileges of Christian monasteries. He appointed capable Greeks and converted Christians to high positions, understanding that the empire needed their expertise. He even maintained friendly relations with Byzantine Emperor Manuel, the two rulers exchanging gifts and correspondence like old friends rather than natural enemies. When Mehmed died in 1421 AD, he left an empire that was smaller than Bayezid's but more stable. His son, Murad II, inherited not just territory but functioning institutions and a restored sense of Ottoman identity. The empire had survived its near-death experience and learned valuable lessons. Never overextend, maintain internal unity, and respect the limits of power. But Murad II would face new challenges. Europe had used the Ottoman collapse to strengthen its defenses. Hungary had emerged as a regional power under capable kings. A young Albanian noble named Skanderbeg, trained by the Ottomans themselves, would soon lead the most effective resistance the empire had ever faced. And in Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire, though reduced to little more than the city itself, still stood as a symbol of Christian resistance. The Ottoman Empire had been given a second chance. The question now was whether they could reclaim their former glory without repeating Bayezid's mistakes. The answer would come from an unexpected source, a sultan who tried to retire twice, and his son who would become the most famous Ottoman ruler of all. Some moments in history mark clear dividing lines between eras. May 29th, 1453. AD was one of those moments. On that day, the last vestige of the Roman Empire, which had endured for over 2,000 years, finally fell to a 21-year-old Ottoman sultan with an obsession. Mehmed II inherited the throne in 1451 AD under questionable circumstances. His father, Murad II, had actually abdicated twice, wanting to retire to a life of contemplation. Both times, crises forced him back, first a crusade, then Janissary unrest. When Murad finally died, peacefully in his bed, young Mehmed took power with something to prove. From childhood, Mehmed had been different from previous Ottoman rulers. He spoke 7 languages fluently: Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, Serbian, and Hebrew. He read Homer in the original Greek and kept a library that included works on Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Augustus. His tutors reported that the young prince was particularly fascinated by one topic: the conquest of Constantinople. Constantinople, in 1453, AD, was a shadow of its former glory, but still the most famous city in the Christian world. Its population had shrunk from over 500,000 to perhaps 50,000. Entire neighborhoods stood empty, reverting to farmland within the walls. But those walls, the Theodosian walls, remained the greatest fortification system ever built, never breached by force in over 1,000 years. Constantine XI, the last Byzantine emperor, knew what was coming. When Mehmed built a fortress called Rumeli Hisara on the European side of the Bosphorus, directly across from an older Ottoman fort, Constantinople was effectively cut off from Black Sea trade. Constantine sent ambassadors pleading for peace. Mehmed had them executed, a clear declaration of intent. What made Mehmed different from previous Ottoman sultans who had besieged Constantinople was his embrace of new technology. He hired a Hungarian engineer named Orban, who claimed he could build a cannon capable of destroying any wall. Orban had first offered his services to Constantine, but the Byzantines couldn't afford his fee. Mehmed paid him 4 times what he asked and gave him unlimited resources. The cannon Orban built was a monster. 27 feet long, capable of firing stone balls weighing over half a ton. It took 60 oxen to pull and 200 men to operate. It could only fire 7 times a day without cracking, and the sound of its discharge could be heard 13 miles away. But it represented something revolutionary. The age of impregnable walls was ending. Mehmed assembled the largest army in Ottoman history for the siege, between 80,000 and 100,000 men. The defenders numbered fewer than 10,000, including Byzantine soldiers, Genoese volunteers, and ordinary citizens. The disparity seemed overwhelming, but Constantinople had survived against worse odds before. The siege began on April 6, 1453 AD. For the first week, Ottoman cannons pounded the walls continuously. The defenders worked through the night, filling breaches with rubble, wooden stockades, and anything else available. The Genoese commander, Giovanni Giustiniani, proved particularly effective, organizing the defense with remarkable skill. But Mehmed had another surprise. A fleet. Previous Ottoman sieges had failed partly because Byzantine ships could resupply the city through the Golden Horn, the harbour on Constantinople's north side. A massive chain stretched across the Horn's entrance, preventing enemy ships from entering. Mehmed's solution was audacious beyond belief. On the night of April 22nd, Ottoman workers hauled 70 ships overland on greased logs, moving them from the Bosphorus around Galata and into the Golden Horn, bypassing the chain entirely. The defenders woke to find Ottoman warships in their protected harbour. Now they had to defend the sea walls as well, spreading their already thin forces even further. For 7 weeks, the siege continued. Ottoman miners tried to tunnel under the walls, only to be countered by Byzantine miners who collapsed their tunnels. Massive assault towers were pushed against the walls and burned by Greek fire, the Byzantine secret incendiary weapon. Wave after wave of Ottoman troops attacked the breaches, only to be thrown back by desperate defenders. Constantine XI fought on the walls personally, understanding that his presence was worth 1,000 soldiers for morale. He rejected Mehmed's offer of safe passage and lordship over the Peloponnese if he surrendered. According to witnesses, he said he would die as emperor rather than live without an empire. By late May, both sides were exhausted. Ottoman casualties numbered in the thousands. Mehmed's advisors suggested lifting the siege. They had made their point, and Constantinople could be isolated and starved slowly. But Mehmed refused. He understood that failing here would mark him as weak, inviting challenges from Europe and rival Turkish beyliks alike. On May 28th, Mehmed ordered preparations for a final assault. That night, the Ottoman camp was strangely quiet. Soldiers were praying, preparing for what many expected to be their last battle. Inside Constantinople, church bells rang continuously. Catholics and Orthodox, who had feuded bitterly over theology, prayed together in the Hagia Sophia. Everyone understood that tomorrow would decide everything. The final assault began at 1:30 a.m. on May 29th. Mehmed sent in waves, first irregular troops to exhaust the defenders, then provincial forces, and finally the elite Janissaries. For hours, the walls held. Then disaster struck the defenders. Giustiniani was wounded by a crossbow bolt or gunshot. His Genoese troops, seeing their commander carried away, began to waver. At that crucial moment, some Ottoman troops found a small gate, the Kirko Porta, that had been left unlocked after a sortie. They poured through, appearing behind the defenders on the walls. The defense collapsed rapidly after that. Ottoman banners appeared on the towers. The cry went up that the city had fallen. Constantine XI made his last stand near the gate of St. Romanus. Witnesses say he threw off his imperial regalia, declaring he would die as a simple soldier, and charged into the Ottoman ranks. His body was never definitively identified. Legend says he turned to stone and waits beneath Constantinople to reclaim it someday, the marble emperor sleeping until Christianity's hour of greatest need. Mehmed entered the city that afternoon. He went straight to the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom for nearly 1,000 years. There, he performed the most symbolically powerful act imaginable. He prayed, converting the church into a mosque with that single gesture. But he also ordered his soldiers to stop looting, declaring that Constantinople's buildings and remaining citizens were under his protection. What Mehmed did next revealed his vision. He didn't destroy Constantinople, he began rebuilding it. He invited Greeks who had fled to return, guaranteeing their safety and property. He appointed a new patriarch for the Orthodox Church, granting him authority over all Orthodox Christians in the empire. He brought in Muslims, Jews, Armenians, and others to repopulate the city, offering tax incentives and free housing. Within Mehmed's lifetime, Constantinople, now called Istanbul, would again become the world's largest city. But more than just size, it became the Ottoman capital in every sense. The Sultan moved his court there permanently. The empire's administration centered there. It became the nexus where East met West, where Islamic and Christian traditions merged into something uniquely Ottoman. The conquest of Constantinople sent shockwaves across both Christian and Islamic worlds. In Europe, it was seen as catastrophe. The final fall of Rome, the triumph of Islam over Christianity. Church bells rang in mourning from London to Moscow. But it also sparked the Renaissance, as Greek scholars fleeing Constantinople brought classical texts to Western Europe, igniting intellectual revolution. In the Islamic world, Mehmed became Fatih, the conqueror. He had achieved what Arab caliphs and Turkish sultans had failed to do for 800 years. The Ottomans were no longer just another Muslim power. They were the supreme Islamic empire, inheritors of both Roman and Islamic imperial traditions. Mehmed would rule for another 28 years, expanding the empire into the Balkans, Anatolia, and even attempting to conquer Italy. But nothing would match the significance of that morning in May, when the last Roman emperor fell and a new era began. The medieval world had ended. The Ottoman age had truly begun. If Mehmed was the conqueror who transformed the Ottomans into an empire, Suleiman was the ruler who transformed that empire into a civilization, known in the West as Suleiman the Magnificent, and in the Islamic world as Kanuni, the lawgiver. He presided over the Ottoman Golden Age. During his 46-year reign from 1520 AD to 1566 AD, the empire reached its greatest extent, its highest cultural achievements, and its most sophisticated administration. Suleiman inherited an empire already powerful, but still rough around the edges. His great-grandfather Mehmed had conquered. His grandfather Bayezid II had consolidated. His father Selim I, called the Grim, had turned east, conquering the Mamluk Sultanate and making the Ottomans protectors of Mecca and Medina. Now it was Suleiman's turn, and Europe held its breath. He began with Belgrade, the gateway to Central Europe. The fortress city had resisted Ottoman sieges for over a century, but in 1521 AD, it fell to Suleiman's cannons in just 3 weeks. Next came Rhodes, home to the Knights Hospitaller, those warrior monks who had fought Muslims since the Crusades. After a 6-month siege in 1522 AD, the Knights surrendered. Surprisingly, Suleiman allowed them to leave with honor, ships, and weapons, a chivalrous gesture that earned him respect even from his enemies. But these were just preliminaries to Suleiman's real ambition, the heart of Europe itself. In 1526 AD, he led 100,000 men north into Hungary. At Mohacs, the young Hungarian king Louis II made a fatal decision. Instead of waiting for reinforcements, he attacked the Ottoman army with just 25,000 men. The battle lasted less than 2 hours. Hungarian knights charged into carefully prepared killing fields, where Ottoman cannons and Janissary muskets destroyed them. King Louis drowned fleeing the battlefield, his heavy armor dragging him under as he tried to cross a stream. With Hungary's nobility decimated and its king dead, Suleiman could have annexed the entire kingdom. Instead, he made a strategic decision that would shape European politics for centuries. He divided Hungary into 3 parts: the center under direct Ottoman control, the east as a vassal state under John Zapolya, and the west left to Ferdinand of Austria. This created a permanent conflict between the Habsburgs and Ottomans, preventing either from achieving total dominance. 3 years later, Suleiman marched on Vienna itself. The 1529 AD siege of Vienna marked the Ottoman Empire's furthest penetration into Europe. For 3 weeks, Ottoman cannons pounded the walls while miners dug tunnels beneath them. But autumn rains turned the roads to mud, preventing Suleiman's heaviest siege guns from arriving. Winter approached, threatening to trap the Ottoman army far from home. Suleiman withdrew, but the message was clear. The Ottomans could strike at the heart of Christendom whenever they chose. While his armies dominated on land, Suleiman understood that true imperial power required naval supremacy. He found the perfect instrument in Hayreddin Barbarossa, a former pirate who became the Ottoman Empire's greatest admiral. Under Barbarossa's command, the Ottoman fleet dominated the Mediterranean, raiding European coasts at will and ferrying Muslim refugees from Spain to safety in Ottoman territories. The naval expansion brought the Ottomans into conflict with the Spanish Empire of Charles V. These two superpowers, one controlling much of Europe and the Americas, the other dominating the Middle East and Eastern Europe, fought for supremacy across the Mediterranean. The Ottomans allied with France against their common Habsburg enemy, shocking Christian Europe. A most Christian king allied with the Islamic Sultan. But Suleiman's greatness wasn't measured only in conquests. His legal reforms transformed Ottoman society. He organized the empire's laws into a comprehensive code called the Kanun, harmonizing Islamic religious law with practical administrative needs. These laws regulated everything from taxation to criminal justice, from land ownership to commercial transactions. The Kanun was revolutionary in its scope and fairness. It limited the power of provincial governors, protecting subjects from arbitrary rule. It standardized punishments, ending the chaotic local variations that had existed. Most remarkably, it applied to everyone. Even the Sultan's own officials could be prosecuted under these laws. Under Suleiman, Istanbul became the wonder of the world. The architect Mimar Sinan, possibly the greatest architectural genius of his age, built the Süleymaniye Mosque, a structure that rivaled and perhaps surpassed the Hagia Sophia. Its cascading domes seemed to float weightlessly. Its minarets reached toward heaven like prayers made stone. Sinan would design over 300 buildings during his career, creating the distinctive Ottoman architectural style that still defines Istanbul's skyline. The Ottoman court under Suleiman became a center of learning and culture. Poets wrote in Turkish, Arabic, and Persian. Miniaturist painters created intricate works combining Islamic and Byzantine traditions. Calligraphers elevated writing to high art. Scientists and mathematicians translated and expanded upon Greek and Arab texts. Suleiman himself was a poet, writing under the pen name Muhibbi, the lover. His verses, still studied today, reveal a complex personality, a warrior who longed for peace, a ruler who understood the loneliness of absolute power. The people think of wealth and power as the greatest fate, but in this world, a spell of health is the best state. What men call sovereignty is a worldly strife and constant war. Worship of God is the highest throne, the happiest of all estates. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Suleiman's reign was his relationship with Hürrem Sultan, known in the West as Roxolana. A slave girl from Ruthenia, modern-day Ukraine, she became Suleiman's wife, breaking centuries of Ottoman tradition. Sultans didn't marry, they kept concubines who bore their heirs. But Suleiman freed Hürrem and married her, making her his queen and closest advisor. Hürrem's influence reshaped Ottoman politics. She corresponded with European queens as an equal, funded charitable institutions, and influenced foreign policy. She also initiated what historians call the Sultanate of Women, a period when imperial women exercised unprecedented power. Her daughter Mihrima became one of the empire's wealthiest individuals, while her sons competed to succeed Suleiman. This succession struggle would cast a shadow over Suleiman's final years. Ottoman tradition demanded that only one son survive to prevent civil war. Suleiman's eldest son Mustafa, popular with the army, seemed the natural heir, but Hürrem wanted the throne for one of her sons. In 1553 AD, Suleiman ordered Mustafa's execution, believing, perhaps incorrectly, that his son was plotting rebellion. The execution of Mustafa haunted Suleiman's remaining years. The Janissaries, who had loved the prince, never fully forgave the Sultan. European observers noted that the aging sultan seemed increasingly melancholic, burdened by the terrible necessities of power. Suleiman died in 1566 AD, still on campaign, besieging the Hungarian fortress of Szigetvar. He was 71 years old, having ruled for 46 years, the longest reigning Ottoman sultan. His Grand Vizier kept his death secret for weeks, preserving order until his son Selim could secure the throne. At Suleiman's death, the Ottoman Empire stretched from the gates of Vienna to the Indian Ocean, from the Crimea to Sudan. It contained perhaps 25 million subjects, more than any European power. Its armies were still the finest in the world, its treasury overflowing, its culture flourishing. But empires, like people, have lifespans. The very perfection of Suleiman's system contained the seeds of its eventual decline. The empire had grown so large that further expansion became increasingly difficult and expensive. The institutions he perfected would eventually become rigid, unable to adapt to changing times. History rarely provides clear turning points, but the Battle of Lepanto on October 7th, 1571 AD was one of them. For the first time in over a century, a European force decisively defeated the Ottoman navy. The psychological impact far exceeded the military consequences. The Ottomans were no longer invincible. The battle itself was apocalyptic in scale. Over 400 warships and 140,000 men clashed in the Gulf of Patras off western Greece. The Holy League, Spain, Venice, the Papal States, and others had finally united against the Ottoman threat. For 4 hours, the battle raged with a fury that witnesses compared to the end of the world. The Ottomans lost 200 ships and perhaps 30,000 men. More importantly, they lost experienced sailors and naval officers who couldn't be quickly replaced. Ali Pasha, the Ottoman admiral, died in the fighting, his head displayed on a pike. Christian Europe celebrated as if the Ottoman Empire itself had fallen. But empires don't collapse from single defeats. Grand Vizier Sokolu Mehmed Pasha famously told the Venetian ambassador, "You have shaved our beard, but it will grow back stronger. We have cut off your arm in Cyprus, and you cannot grow another." Within a year, the Ottomans had rebuilt their fleet, larger than before. Venice, exhausted by the war's cost, made a separate peace, ceding Cyprus permanently to Ottoman control. Yet something had changed. The Ottoman Empire after Lepanto began a subtle but irreversible transformation from an expanding power to a defensive one. The empire was still enormous, still wealthy, still powerful, but it was no longer growing. The problems went deeper than military setbacks. The discovery of the Americas had shifted global trade routes. Portuguese ships now carried Asian spices around Africa, bypassing Ottoman middlemen. Spanish silver from Peru and Mexico flooded European markets, causing inflation that the Ottomans couldn't control. The empire's economy, based on controlling trade between East and West, faced an existential challenge. The succession system that had once strengthened the empire now weakened it. After Suleiman, sultans increasingly remained in the palace rather than leading armies personally. Selim II, known unflatteringly as Selim the Drunk, preferred wine and poetry to warfare and administration. Future sultans would be even worse, children raised in the palace's gilded cage, knowing nothing of the real world they supposedly ruled. The Janissaries, once the empire's strength, became its burden. Originally forbidden to marry or engage in commerce, they gradually won these privileges. By 1600 AD, the corps had grown from an elite force of 20,000 to a bloated institution of over 100,000. Many were Janissaries in name only, collecting pay but never training or fighting. Worse, they began intervening in politics, deposing sultans who threatened their privileges. The Timar system also decayed. Originally, these land grants supported cavalry who served when called. But as warfare evolved toward gunpowder and professional armies, feudal cavalry became obsolete. Timar holders increasingly avoided military service, instead focusing on extracting maximum revenue from their lands. The countryside, squeezed by rapacious tax collectors, grew restive. Meanwhile, Europe was transforming. The Renaissance had given way to the scientific revolution. European armies adopted new tactics, linear formations, disciplined firepower, professional officer corps. Their ships grew larger and more heavily armed. Most importantly, European states developed more efficient administration and taxation, allowing them to field larger, better-equipped armies. The Ottomans weren't blind to these changes. Reform-minded officials wrote treatises analyzing the empire's problems and proposing solutions. But reform meant challenging entrenched interests. The Janissaries, the religious establishment, provincial governors who had become semi-independent. Every attempt at reform met fierce resistance. The long Turkish War from 1593 AD to 1606 AD revealed how much had changed. Fighting against Habsburg Austria, the Ottomans could no longer achieve decisive victories. Battles became grinding affairs of attrition. The war ended with the Treaty of Zitvatorok, the first time the Ottomans negotiated as equals rather than victors. Yet even in decline, the Ottoman Empire remained formidable. In 1683 AD, they besieged Vienna again, coming within a hair's breadth of victory. For 2 months, Ottoman sappers mined under the walls while artillery pounded breaches. The city was days from falling when a relief army led by Polish King John III Sobieski arrived. The Battle of Vienna on September 12, 1683. AD was the empire's last great gamble. The Ottoman army, weakened by siege warfare and extended supply lines, faced fresh European forces. The Polish winged hussars charge, perhaps the last great cavalry charge to decide a major battle, shattered Ottoman lines. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha fled, leaving behind the Ottoman camp with its legendary treasures, including coffee beans that would introduce Vienna to coffeehouse culture. After Vienna, the Ottoman Empire would never again threaten the heart of Europe. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699. AD marked the first significant territorial losses. Hungary, Transylvania, and much of the Balkans passed to Austrian control. For an empire built on continuous expansion, this psychological blow was devastating. The 18th century brought moments of revival. The Tulip period under Ahmed III saw cultural flowering and tentative westernization. The first printing press in Turkish opened in Istanbul. Ottoman ambassadors traveled to European courts, sending back detailed reports on Western innovations. Gardens filled with tulips, imported from Europe after originally being exported from Turkey, became fashionable. But these reforms remained superficial. The printing press was shut down after printing just 17 books in 30 years, opposed by religious authorities who feared it would spread heretical ideas. The Janissaries revolted against any military modernization that threatened their privileged position. Provincial notables carved out autonomous fiefdoms, sending only token tribute to Istanbul. By 1750 AD, the Ottoman Empire had become what Europeans mockingly called the sick man of Europe. But sick men can live for a very long time, and the Ottoman Empire would survive another 170 years, longer than many healthy states exist. Its decline was not a collapse, but a long, slow transformation, punctuated by moments of revival and reform. The empire that had once terrified Europe now became part of the European balance of power. Britain and France would prop it up against Russian expansion. Its territories became chess pieces in the great game of imperial rivalry. The hunter had become the hunted, but it would take centuries for the final kill. To understand the Ottoman Empire's remarkable longevity, we must look beyond sultans and battles to the daily life that sustained it for 6 centuries. This was an empire where a Serbian peasant could become Grand Vizier, where Jewish refugees found haven, where Armenian merchants grew wealthy, and where Greek scholars preserved ancient wisdom. It was, in many ways, history's most successful multicultural experiment. The millet system was the foundation of this diversity. Each religious community, Muslim, Greek Orthodox, Armenian Christian, Jewish, formed a semi-autonomous millet with its own laws, courts, and leaders. A Jewish merchant in Istanbul might never interact with Islamic law. His rabbi would handle disputes, marriages, and inheritances. An Armenian craftsman in Aleppo lived under Armenian patriarch's authority, not the local qadis. This system created remarkable religious tolerance by medieval standards. When Spain expelled its Jews in 1492 AD, Sultan Bayezid II sent ships to rescue them. He reportedly said of Spanish King Ferdinand, "You venture to call Ferdinand a wise ruler, he who has impoverished his own country and enriched mine." These Sephardic Jews brought valuable skills, medicine, finance, printing, that enriched the empire. Constantinople, Istanbul, embodied this diversity. By 1600 AD, it was the world's largest city with over 700,000 inhabitants. The Grand Bazaar, still functioning today, contained over 4,000 shops where you could buy Chinese silk, Indian spices, Russian furs, and Venetian glass. Each trade had its own section. The gold merchants here, carpet sellers there, spice traders in their aromatic corner. Coffee arrived in Istanbul around 1540 AD and transformed social life. Coffee houses sprouted everywhere, becoming centers of conversation, poetry reading, and political discussion. Some sultans tried to ban them, fearing seditious talk, but coffee culture proved unstoppable. From Istanbul, coffee spread to Europe. The word itself comes from Turkish kahve, derived from Arabic kahwa. The Ottoman Empire pioneered public services that wouldn't appear in Europe for centuries. Every neighborhood had a hammam, a public bath, where all classes mingled in the democracy of steam and hot water. Waqfs, charitable foundations, funded hospitals, schools, soup kitchens, and caravanserais, where travelers could stay free for 3 days. The Haseki Sultan complex, built by Hurrem Sultan, included a hospital with a special section for mental illness, treating it as a medical condition rather than demonic possession. Education in the Ottoman Empire combined religious and practical learning. While European universities remained exclusively Christian and aristocratic, Ottoman madrasas welcomed talented students regardless of background. The palace school for Janissaries and administrators taught not just Quran and Islamic law, but mathematics, languages, history, and even music. Graduates emerged as cultured polymaths capable of governing a diverse empire. Women in the Ottoman Empire occupied a complex position. While formally restricted in public life, elite women wielded enormous behind-the-scenes power. The Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, often became the empire's most powerful person. Kosem Sultan effectively ruled for decades through her sons and grandsons. These women built mosques, funded charities, and conducted diplomatic correspondence with European queens. The Devshirme system, collecting Christian boys for imperial service, seems cruel today, but created unprecedented social mobility. A Serbian shepherd boy could become Grand Vizier, commanding armies and governing millions. Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, born Orthodox Christian in Bosnia, served as Grand Vizier for 3 sultans. He maintained contact with his Christian family, even appointing his brother as Serbian patriarch. Trade was the empire's lifeblood, and the Ottomans understood this. They maintained roads, protected caravans, and standardized weights and measures across their territories. A merchant could travel from Budapest to Baghdad using the same currency and finding the same commercial laws. This stability made the Ottoman Empire incredibly wealthy. In 1600 AD, it collected more tax revenue than all European states combined. The empire's cultural achievements matched its commercial success. Ottoman miniature painting, influenced by Persian tradition but distinctively Turkish, reached extraordinary refinement. Calligraphy was considered the highest art form. Sultans themselves practiced it. Ottoman poetry, written in Turkish, Persian, and Arabic, created a sophisticated literary culture that influenced everything from diplomatic correspondence to love letters. Music flourished despite periodic religious opposition. The Mehter Band, the Janissary military band, influenced European military music and later classical composers. Mozart, Beethoven, and others incorporated Turkish themes into their work. The Ottoman court developed complex musical forms combining Turkish, Arab, Persian, and Byzantine traditions. Ottoman cuisine reflected the empire's diversity. The palace kitchens employed hundreds of cooks specializing in different traditions: Turkish, Arab, Persian, Balkan, Caucasian. They created dishes that spread throughout the empire and beyond: baklava, kebab, pilaf, dolma. The tradition of meze, small shared dishes, encouraged leisurely social dining that strengthened community bonds. But this diversity also created tensions. Muslims resented paying the same taxes as dhimmis, who avoided military service. Christians and Jews faced legal disabilities. Their testimony counted less in court. They couldn't build new churches or synagogues without permission. They had to wear distinctive clothing. These restrictions, mild by medieval standards, would become sources of grievance as European ideas of equality spread. The empire's provinces developed distinct regional cultures. Egypt, though Ottoman ruled, maintained its unique character, with Cairo rivaling Istanbul in learning and culture. The Arab provinces preserved their tribal structures and customs under Ottoman oversight. The Balkans developed a hybrid culture, Ottoman in administration, but maintaining local languages and traditions. This decentralization was both strength and weakness. It allowed the empire to govern vast territories with minimal force, respecting local customs while maintaining overall control. But it also meant that when central authority weakened, provinces could easily break away. The empire was less a unified state than a collection of regions held together by Ottoman military might and administrative efficiency. By the 18th century, this delicate balance was breaking down. European ideas of nationalism began penetrating Ottoman territories. Greeks dreamed of resurrection of Byzantium, Serbs of medieval glory, Arabs of independence. The millet system, which had preserved distinct identities, now became a source of separatism. Yet even as political structure crumbled, Ottoman culture continued influencing the world. European Orientalism, fascination with Ottoman luxury and sensuality, shaped art, literature, and fashion. Turkish baths appeared in European cities. Ottoman textiles inspired European designs. The cultural legacy would long outlive the political empire. By 1839 AD, the Ottoman Empire faced a stark choice: reform or die. Egypt under Muhammad Ali Pasha had effectively broken away, defeating Ottoman armies with European-trained forces. Greece had won independence with European help. Russia pressed from the north, having already seized Crimean territories. The empire that once terrified Europe now survived only because European powers couldn't agree on how to divide it. Sultan Abdulmecid I, just 16 when he took the throne, launched the most ambitious reform program in Ottoman history, the Tanzimat, meaning reorganization. On November 3, 1839 AD, his officials read the Hati Sharif of Gulhani in the Rose Garden of Topkapi Palace. This document promised something revolutionary: equality before the law for all Ottoman subjects, regardless of religion. The reforms were breathtaking in scope. The old tax farming system, where collectors paid up front for the right to squeeze provinces, was abolished in favor of salaried tax collectors. New secular courts operated alongside religious ones. Christians and Jews could serve in the military or pay an exemption tax if they preferred. Most radically, the Ottoman government began issuing bonds, entering international financial markets. The transformation of Istanbul symbolized these changes. Gas streetlights appeared in 1856 AD. The first bridge across the Golden Horn connected the old city with the European quarter of Galata. Telegraph lines linked the capital with provinces. Newspapers in Turkish, Arabic, Greek, and Armenian proliferated, creating the empire's first public sphere. Education underwent revolutionary change. New secular schools taught European languages, sciences, and mathematics alongside traditional subjects. The Ottoman Imperial School of Medicine, staffed by European professors, trained doctors in modern techniques. For the first time, talented provincials could receive world-class education without leaving the empire. The military transformation was most dramatic. In 1826 AD, Sultan Mahmud II had destroyed the Janissaries in what was called the Auspicious Incident, surrounding their barracks with modern artillery and massacring those who resisted disbandment. Now, Prussian advisors trained a new conscript army equipped with modern rifles and artillery. The Ottoman Navy ordered ironclad warships from British shipyards. These reforms created a new class, the young Ottomans. Western-educated bureaucrats and intellectuals, they wanted even more radical change. Writers like Namık Kemal argued for constitutional monarchy, parliamentary democracy, and Ottoman nationalism that would unite all subjects regardless of religion or ethnicity. They published newspapers, wrote plays, and created the empire's first modern political movement. The Crimean War of 1853 to 1856 AD showed both promise and problems. For the first time, the Ottoman Empire fought alongside European allies, Britain and France, against Russia. Ottoman forces performed better than expected, holding Sebastopol and fighting effectively in the Caucasus. But the war's cost was staggering, forcing the empire to take its first foreign loans. These loans became an addiction. Between 1854 AD and 1875 AD, the Ottoman government borrowed £200 million, an astronomical sum. The money funded reforms, but also palace construction, military adventures, and corruption. By 1875 AD, servicing foreign debt consumed half the state budget. When the empire defaulted, European powers established the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. Foreigners now controlled Ottoman finances. The 1876 AD constitution marked the Tanzimat's climax. Sultan Abdülhamid II, newly enthroned, agreed to become a constitutional monarch. An elected parliament with Christian, Jewish, and Muslim deputies convened in Istanbul. For a brief moment, it seemed the Ottoman Empire might transform into a modern democratic state. But the parliament lasted just 2 years. Using the 1877 to 1878 AD war with Russia as pretext, Abdülhamid suspended the constitution and ruled as an absolute monarch for the next 30 years. He modernized selectively, building railroads and telegraph networks while suppressing political dissent. His secret police, modeled on Russian and Austrian systems, monitored intellectuals and infiltrated opposition groups. Yet modernization couldn't be stopped. The Hejaz Railway, connecting Damascus to Medina, demonstrated Ottoman engineering capability. Ottoman officers trained in European military academies absorbed not just tactics, but political ideas. Provincial cities like Beirut, Smyrna, and Salonika became cosmopolitan centers where new ideas flourished. The empire's diversity, once a strength, became increasingly problematic. Nationalist movements gained momentum everywhere. Armenians, inspired by Bulgarian independence, began agitating for autonomy. Arabs, influenced by European nationalism and resentful of Turkish domination, formed secret societies. Even Albanians, long loyal to the empire, developed national consciousness. The 1908 AD Young Turk Revolution seemed to offer hope. Military officers from Salonika forced Abdülhamid to restore the constitution. Elections were held, parliament reconvened, censorship ended. Armenians, Greeks, Arabs, and Turks celebrated together in the streets, believing they were witnessing Ottoman renewal. But the Young Turks, officially the Committee of Union and Progress, had different ideas. They wanted to save the empire through Turkish nationalism and centralization, not multicultural democracy. Their policies of Turkification alienated non-Turkish populations. Their military adventures, attempting to reconquer lost territories, ended in disaster. The Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913 AD delivered crushing blows. Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, and Montenegro allied against the empire, conquering almost all remaining European territories. The Ottoman army, supposedly modernized, collapsed in weeks. Istanbul itself was threatened before Bulgarian forces stopped just miles from the capital. By 1914 AD, the Ottoman Empire had lost most of its European territories. Its finances were controlled by foreigners, and its population was increasingly divided. The Tanzimat had modernized the empire but also exposed its fundamental contradictions. How could an Islamic empire embrace secular law? How could a multinational empire survive the age of nationalism? How could an autocratic system adopt democratic reforms without destroying itself? These questions would receive their final, tragic answer in the furnace of World War I. The empire that had adapted and survived for 6 centuries was about to face a crisis from which it could not recover. On November 2nd, 1914 AD, Russian warships bombarded Ottoman ports on the Black Sea. Within days, the Ottoman Empire was at war with Russia, Britain, and France. The decision to enter World War I alongside Germany and Austria-Hungary would prove the empire's death warrant. The young Turk triumvirate, Enver, Talat, and Cemal Pashas, saw the war as an opportunity. Enver Pasha dreamed of a vast Turkish empire stretching from the Balkans to Central Asia. He believed German military might would help recover lost territories and unite all Turkic peoples under Ottoman rule. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The war began with disaster at Sarıkamış. Enver personally led 100,000 troops through the Caucasus Mountains in winter, attempting to encircle Russian forces. Poorly equipped Ottoman soldiers froze in mountain passes. Of 100,000 men who began the campaign, fewer than 20,000 survived. Entire divisions simply vanished in the snow. The British assault on Gallipoli in 1915 AD offered the empire's only major victory. For 8 months, Ottoman forces commanded by German General Liman von Sanders and Turkish officer Mustafa Kemal held the peninsula against British, French, Australian, and New Zealand forces. The campaign cost 250,000 Allied casualties and transformed Mustafa Kemal into a national hero. But Gallipoli couldn't mask disasters elsewhere. In Mesopotamia, Ottoman armies initially defeated British forces, capturing an entire division at Kut, but reinforced British armies eventually conquered Baghdad and pushed toward Mosul. In Palestine, Ottoman forces held the line at Gaza for 2 years before British General Allenby's breakthrough sent them reeling northward. The Arab Revolt of 1916 AD struck at the empire's heart. Sharif Hussein of Mecca, guardian of Islam's holiest sites, declared independence after British promises of an Arab kingdom. T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, helped Arab forces destroy the Hejaz Railway and capture Aqaba. By war's end, Arab forces controlled most of the Arabian Peninsula and had entered Damascus. The war's darkest chapter was the Armenian genocide. Claiming Armenian collaboration with Russia, the Young Turk government ordered deportations in 1915 AD. What followed was systematic murder. Armenian men were massacred, women and children driven into the Syrian desert to die. Between 600,000 and 1.5 million Armenians perished, one of the 20th century's first genocides. By 1918 AD, the Ottoman Empire was collapsing. 4 years of war had killed perhaps 750,000 Ottoman soldiers and countless civilians. Famine ravaged Syria and Lebanon. Disease spread unchecked. The economy had completely collapsed. Paper money was worthless. Trade non-existent. The Mudros Armistice of October 30th, 1918, AD ended Ottoman participation in the war. Allied forces occupied Istanbul. French troops seized Syria. British forces controlled Mesopotamia and Palestine. Greeks landed in Smyrna, and Italians occupied southern Anatolia. The empire that once stretched across 3 continents was reduced to a rump state under foreign occupation. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 AD formalized the empire's dismemberment. Armenia and Kurdistan would become independent states. Greece received Smyrna and eastern Thrace. Italy and France carved up southern Anatolia. The Ottomans retained only central Anatolia and Istanbul, and even Istanbul was under international control. Sultan Mehmed VI accepted these terms, but one man refused, Mustafa Kemal. The hero of Gallipoli escaped to Anatolia and began organizing resistance. The Turkish War of Independence, from 1919 AD to 1923 AD, would determine whether Turks would accept colonization or fight for survival. Kemal's genius lay in uniting desperate elements. Ottoman officers refusing surrender, Muslim clerics preaching resistance, peasants defending their land, even Circassian bandits. He established a rival government in Ankara, declaring the Istanbul government traitors for accepting foreign occupation. The war was brutal. Greek forces, attempting to recreate Byzantine glory, advanced deep into Anatolia. Both sides committed atrocities, Greeks burning Turkish villages, Turks massacring Greek civilians. At the Sakarya River in 1921 AD, Kemal's forces finally stopped the Greek advance just 50 miles from Ankara. The Great Offensive of 1922 AD shattered Greek forces. In a brilliant campaign, Kemal's armies encircled and destroyed the Greek army at Dumlupinar. Retreating Greeks burned Smyrna, ending 3,000 years of Greek presence in Asia Minor. The subsequent population exchange, 1.5 million Greeks leaving Turkey, 500,000 Turks leaving Greece, created ethnic homogeneity through human tragedy. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 AD recognized Kemal's victory. Turkey retained all of Anatolia and eastern Thrace. No foreign zones, no reparations, no military restrictions. Turkey emerged as a fully sovereign state, but it was no longer an empire. The Ottoman dynasty that had ruled for 623 years was abolished. On November 1st, 1922 AD, the Grand National Assembly declared the Sultanate extinct. Mehmed VI, the last Sultan, slipped out of Istanbul on a British warship, dying in exile in Italy. The Caliphate lingered until March 3rd, 1924 AD, when Kemal abolished it too. The last Caliph, Abdulmecid II, left Turkey on the Orient Express, carrying a suitcase and little else. Mustafa Kemal, later taking the surname Ataturk, father of the Turks, built the Republic of Turkey on the Ottoman Empire's ashes. He abolished Islamic law, adopted the Latin alphabet, gave women the vote, and tried to erase Ottoman influence entirely. The fez was banned, the Turkish language purged of Arabic and Persian words. Even the call to prayer was briefly required in Turkish rather than Arabic. The Ottoman Empire's Arab provinces became British and French mandates. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan. Arbitrary lines drawn on maps by colonial officials created new nations. The Balfour Declaration promised Jews a homeland in Palestine, sowing seeds of future conflict. The Sykes-Picot Agreement's straight-line borders ignored ethnic and religious realities, creating instabilities that persist today. The empire's end released forces that still shape our world. The Armenian genocide's denial remains a source of international tension. Kurdish nationalism, suppressed by Ottomans, now challenges Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. The abolition of the caliphate left a spiritual vacuum that groups like ISIS claim to fill. Yet something was lost with the Ottoman Empire's fall, a unique experiment in managing diversity. For all its flaws, the empire had allowed different peoples to coexist for centuries. The nation-states that replaced it pursued homogeneity through forced assimilation or worse. The cosmopolitan cities where Jews, Christians, and Muslims had lived together became monocultural shadows of their former selves. Stand today in Istanbul's Sultanahmet Square, between the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia, and you stand at the crossroads of history. The stones beneath your feet have known Roman legions, Byzantine emperors, Ottoman sultans, and modern tourists. The call to prayer that echoes 5 times daily has sounded here for nearly 6 centuries, a continuous thread connecting past to present. The Ottoman Empire's legacy surrounds us, often unrecognized. When Europeans sip coffee in Vienna's cafes, they partake in an Ottoman gift. When diplomats struggle with Middle Eastern borders, they grapple with Ottoman ghosts. When architects marvel at domed mosques from Bosnia to Yemen, they see Sinan's influence. Modern Turkey wrestles with this inheritance daily. After decades of rejecting Ottoman history, Turks now embrace it, sometimes romantically, sometimes politically. Television shows depicting magnificent sultans draw millions of viewers. Politicians invoke Ottoman glory to justify contemporary ambitions. The empire that Ataturk tried to bury refuses to stay dead. The Balkans, too, remain shaped by Ottoman centuries. Sarajevo's mosques and Orthodox churches stand side by side. Ottoman tolerance made stone, Albanian Islam, Bulgarian cuisine, Serbian words borrowed from Turkish. The empire left indelible marks. Even Greece, which defines itself partly through resistance to Ottoman rule, bears unmistakable Ottoman influences in food, music, and daily life. The Arab world's relationship with the Ottoman past is more complex. Some see centuries of Turkish domination that stifled Arab development. Others nostalgically recall Ottoman stability compared to today's chaos. The word Ottoman itself can evoke either cosmopolitan sophistication or foreign oppression, depending on the speaker. Perhaps the empire's greatest legacy is a question: how can diverse peoples live together? The Ottoman answer, hierarchical tolerance through the millet system, seems outdated now. But modern answers, from forced assimilation to ethnic cleansing to partition, have often proven worse. The empire's relative success at managing diversity for 6 centuries deserves study, not just dismissal. Consider what the Ottomans achieved. They took Byzantine administrative genius, Islamic law, Turkish military tradition, Arab learning, and Persian culture, fusing them into something entirely new. They created a system where a Serbian peasant could become Grand Vizier, where Jewish refugees found haven, where Greek merchants grew wealthy. It wasn't perfect, no human system is, but it worked for longer than most empires exist. The Ottoman Empire also offers lessons in decline: its inability to adapt quickly enough to technological change, its resistance to fundamental reform, its assumption that past greatness guaranteed future success. These are warnings for any power. The empire's long decline shows how institutions that once brought strength can become sources of weakness when circumstances change. Yet even in decline, the Ottoman Empire shaped modernity. Its weakness created the Eastern question that dominated European diplomacy for a century. Its territories became laboratories for nationalism, modernization, and colonialism. Its collapse created the modern Middle East, with all its possibilities and problems. Today, a century after its fall, the Ottoman Empire remains controversial. Turkish nationalists glorify it, Arab nationalists condemn it, Islamists invoke it, secularists reject it. Historians debate whether it was an Islamic empire, a Turkish empire, or something transcending both categories. These debates matter because they're really about the present, about identity, legitimacy, and the possibility of coexistence. The empire's end created a void that hasn't been filled. No power since has successfully governed the territories the Ottomans once united. The Middle East's current borders, drawn